They literally smash into each other. This is something I think writers can learn. This show is a prime example of friends to enemies, which is always a really compelling story. I love friends to enemy stories. It's a fascinating thing, but I think very rarely, and if you're going to do one like this, when you have these friends have their little meet cute, if you will, for lack of a better term, bury the reason for their destruction within their meeting. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Let's Talk Stories. I am 1/3 of your host. I am Jared.
I'm Jaylan.
Charles.
And today we are going to be helping you deal with your problems.
Immediately, everyone leaves. No, let me keep my problems. They're mine. They're the only thing that I own in this world. It's my identity.
More specifically, it was a little broad, I admit. But if you've ever struggled with making your protagonist and your antagonist feel dynamic, or ever felt like your villain was just evil for the sake of it, today we are going to talk about how to not do that shit. While we talk about Smallville, the Smallville's pilot specifically, as we discuss contrast, specifically between Clark Kent and Lex Luthor, to make how we ultimately make storytelling richer and more compelling. And by the end, you'll have 3 key steps that help you use contrast effectively in your own writing, as well as the fact that we do have a contrast cheat sheet, quick reference guide that you can check out in our show notes at the bottom or left or wherever you were watching this from. So feel free to check that out. But let's dive in to some Smallville talk. So first of all, everybody knows Smallville is by far one of my favorite childhood shows. And I have to preface that with childhood because it is definitely a favorite from my youth when I was a youth. But everybody also knows I love Smallville. It's not Smallville, Superman. We've talked about Superman before. We have many more Superman episodes to come. But I was able to get these guys to check out Smallville finally. I've been talking to them both about it for probably since I've met them.
Yes.
So the only one that's next to get on the list is Superman and Lois. That is the next pilot to get them to watch, which is actually better than the Smallville pilot, but that's besides the point.
It only goes up from here.
Listen, if you've never seen Smallville and you decide from this episode, I doubt this will be the episode that makes you go and do it. But if it is, please understand, as Charles has called it, what did you call it? Early 2000s soup. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. Cheesy early 2000s soup.
Literally, I swear I said this within the first 5 minutes of the pilot. I said, what in the early 2000s?
And it really is. It really, really is. It also has we talked about this also with Twilight, with the idea of understanding your audience and speaking to that audience. It is a show that is geared towards teenagers who like comic books to an extent, or at the very least, just like Superman in some way, shape, or form. And if you fell into that category in 2001, if you fell into that category in 2001, as I did, I was a teenager, a young fool. I wasn't a teenager yet. I was just becoming a teenager, actually. So technically, younger. Clark was a little bit older than me, but I actually didn't discover Smallville until a couple of years after it was already out. So by the time I had found it, I was the same age as Clark. So to me, he was technically the same age.
Yeah, I thought. To add to that I thought was interesting when I was watching this. I was like, thinking about you when you talked about it, I was like, oh man, that's really funny because it reminds me of me and the Buffyverse, because I knew Buffy from when I was a kid because it was on at the time, but I knew it vaguely, but I got into it, the whole Buffy and Angel stuff, when I was in high school, and there was a lot of conversations in those stories that clicked with me at that age. So I thought it was funny when I was watching this with you in mind. It was like, it's interesting. There's always something. For generation, sure. There's always that one show that clicks those pieces together at that time.
For sure.
Yep.
If it's, science fiction, supernatural, fantasy, all the better.
Exactly. So yeah, I fell in love with this show. So for those of you who don't know what Smallville is about young Clark Kent on his journey to becoming Superman. That is ultimately from the as a teenager all the way to his adulthood. I think it's his mid-20s by the time the show ends. And granted, I will say this, and this is my recommendation to everybody who watches it. Seasons 1 through 5 are fantastic for exactly what they are supposed to be. They are perfect for what they're supposed to be. When they stopped putting music in the episodes and they stopped doing, like, besides score music, but they stopped, like, dropping in sound, like, you know,
all the bops from the early
yeah, when they stopped doing that and they just started, like, score music and stuff, suddenly it became a completely different thing that was a little silly. However, season 9 and season 10 is completely a love letter to Smallville fans across the board. So if you watched it from the beginning, it's just every single episode is just a reminder of, like, thank you for being here for 10 years. What have you done with your life? And then
I remember when this show ended, it was a big deal.
yeah. I remember watching. Oh no. Anyway, but then season 9 is also pretty freaking badass because it's Clark and Zod, and it's just awesome. But all of that to be said, I can go on forever about this, but I won't. So
for at least an hour.
Chapter 1.
But, like, no, I mean, I feel like everybody on this podcast has had their thing, their thing that they just kind of love so much that they just could talk on and on about it. And this one is mine. And so I don't know. I just love it. I love the show so much. I recently started rewatching it. So now I'm, like, getting there are those moments where I'm like, oh, wow, did I really think this was good storytelling? It's not. But it's like, I still love it. And I still, you know, I want to hang out with Clark and I want to hang out with his friends and Black Pete. I always make that joke because everybody's always like, why is Pete black? And he just is. Deal with it.
Just like I was telling you this with Perry White is now always black now. Because of Lawrence Fishburne. And once Lawrence Fishburne wears, and the My Adventures Superman, he's black, and the new movie is black.
Yep, he's just black now.
Yep. That's what it is now.
I will disagree with you slightly and say I thought it was very good storytelling, but it was horrible acting. That's my opinion.
That's fair. That's fair. I will say this. It's not when I say bad storytelling, I don't even mean bad as in across the board. You've only seen a few episodes in.
Fair.
There are some moments, like when you get to, like, season 2 and you're watching it and you're like, okay, they made that choice. I don't know why they made that choice, but I accept it because I love you and I'm here. But I don't know why you did that, but it's okay.
Man, there is TV like that, man.
Yeah, exactly.
There's Tokyo Ghoul the anime. I know the manga's different. But Tokyo Ghoul the anime, first season, like the ending of season 1 is generally some of the best anime I've ever seen. Season 2, you're like, why are you crashing the ship? Why are you crashing the and then season 3? Just, it's so bad. And you're just like, well, I was watching, I'm like, I'm gonna finish this for the main character, but holy crap.
Don't do this to me. I will say this also, and this is only for fans that are listening, people that listen to this that have seen Smallville and know what I'm talking about. The truth of the matter is, and this is just because I need to say it in a public forum, the truth of the matter is that I love Clark Kent, Superman, and Lois Lane together. They belong together. That's you know, they're Mickey and Minnie. They belong. Right. Yeah. Lana Lang is irrelevant, and she'll always be and remain irrelevant to me. However, Clark Kent's ultimate love is and should always be Alicia. You guys haven't met Alicia yet, but in season 3, you meet Alicia, and she is the best. If you ever watched the podcast Talkville, which is the rewatch podcast with Tom Welling and Michael Rosenbaum, where they talk about Smallville and all that other stuff, but they had the actress that played Alicia on there, and it's always talking about, like, it is known throughout Smallville fans that is the relationship that everybody wanted for Clark to have is Alicia. She's a little psychotic in season 3, but in season 4, when she gets her shit together, oh my god! And then the way they took her out on the show, it hurts me to this day. I will cry on this. Listen, that doesn't matter. The point is, it's about Alicia, and I hope that all of you Superman fans out there recognize that if Alicia hadn't got ganked, there would be no Lois, and it just needs to be accepted. If Smallville is considered canon, which it is not, but if it was, that would be the case. All that aside,
I mean, in the comics, Clark dated a mermaid in college.
yes, that is also true. So yeah, so
I tried
Lois
to
better
add her in
count
my
her
friendship,
star,
but
her
could
lucky
not add
stars.
her, Jalon, but it's very interesting. That is
Whoa. Oh my word.
Okay. So now that I've gotten all my stuff out of the way, we can actually talk about the show. First of all, I want to know you guys' thoughts before I start asking you guys questions. What you guys think? Besides the fact that it was, cheesy 2000 soup.
it was pretty good. It was. I say Cheeky 2000s, like, honestly, it's kind of it's nostalgic for
Yeah.
me to go back to that timing and style. But it was pretty good. I find it fascinating that there are just a million different versions of the Superman myth, the origin myth, and a lot of them are really bloody interesting. So, like, there's not that I don't adore Batman, like Superman, Batman, and there's certain super characters. I'm that
Yeah.
kind of old school fan. Like, we're all friends here.
Yeah.
Chorus line there. But with Batman, everyone jokes about, like, if you've read enough of retellings of those origins, it's like, how many things were Bruce's parents doing the night they got murdered?
Yeah.
Like a huge laundry list by this point. But Superman, I thought was really interesting about how they set things up and, like, why are the Luthors there, and what exactly is the relationship between the Luthors and the Kents, and how things came together. I thought was interesting for the mythos, sure, but it was really interesting that, like, it really framed itself as Clark doesn't know what he is, and it's a Superman origin story without the whole enchilada, I presume, without that costume at the end. And I know he gets the costume and becomes Superman and blah 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 blah. But, like,
Don't talk about
to
it.
have a propulsion of the whole story, at least in this pilot, be like there is no, and then he goes off to the Fortress of Solitude or something, or he saves the day, was really interesting. And again, it's the Superboy thing too, because the Superboy thing, I know, like, some people like to go Superboy, and that's cool and all. But even in Superboy, he's got crypto, he's got the tights and the cape, and here to watch it not be that way, I thought was really interesting. And Michael Rosenbaum immediately worked for me as Luthor. Him and his dad really worked for me. I thought was interesting. Tom Welling, I haven't really seen anything of him as Superman. I saw him as Clark. I was like, yes, I get it. Like, those two, I was like, I get it. I did text you that I thought the football tradition was the most psychotic thing in the world.
That was the part of the episode for me that I was like, okay, this is the one real honest thing that has been said, is that sounds like years of therapy waiting to happen.
Yeah, and that was like, so there's some negative 2000s energy to it like that, where I'm like, that's not funny. That's a crime. And the fact that all you little kicks are allowing this to happen generation by generation is just evil Stephen King crap. So I thought that was bad. And then they like skirted the line where it's like when Clark and Lana are talking to her parents at the graveyard, and it's like, oh, is it a girl? Is it a boy? Oh, he has a sick sense of humor like that. I'm like, the homophobia of the 2000s.
Yeah.
Hello again. But no, for the most part, I thought it really, really worked, and I thought it was really interesting, and it just gave me, if Superman was like a restaurant, right? This was an area of the menu I hadn't tasted yet. So it was really interesting to experience that. So, and yeah, I admit, honestly, it's so weird, but like the very end, right? Who's in the barn, and Lana comes up and they do the dance, and then it's like a little fantasy in his head. I was like, man, I've done that before as a teenager. It was so specific, like all the little, 2000s teenage improbs tonight. I mean, this is literally improbs tonight is part of this. That really hit me. I was like, oh man, I remember being like that as a teenager, and I thought that was interesting. The final thing I was going to say is, it's so weird. Until I was in high school, I didn't know that Smallville was about Superman. I was like, oh, that science fiction show in the background. Okay, whatever. Sounds cool. Smallville, that sounds like a cool name. But I bring that up to say, watching this pilot, I was like, that's why I got so confused about it as a kid, having this on the background of my culture brain, is that it really does work like that. It really is the journey-ness of Superman. Basically, it takes that awesome bit of the Christopher Reeve movie and makes it the show thing. And I'm like, that's good. I like it.
I agree with that. From the perspective of someone who has never interacted with canon Superman stories besides the Christopher Reeve film that we watched for the podcast, there were like so many little things that I saw introduced within Smallville, within the pilot episode, and I was like, yes, now I understand it. Now I believe it. That didn't seem stupid like it did in the other movie.
Well, that's your wrong opinion.
Fair. I'm okay with being wrong. But like seeing the history of Lex, seeing Clark was introduced to kryptonite and how he started to understand it. We actually heard where it was from and why it affected him. It made so much more sense. And the Fortress of Solitude being like his safe place in the barn loft was like so beautiful to me. I was like, so much better than just randomly going off to the Arctic for 12 years. I'm okay with that happening, but like the Fortress of Solitude makes so much more sense. It has more meaning now. There was more backstory, so there was more meaning to me. So it felt like a better story. It felt like I could believe this was actually happening, which makes it fun when you get like the superhuman stuff coming into it. Because if you believe that the characters are real, it's a lot easier to believe that the fantastical stuff could be real too. So it triggers my imagination in a way that I can get immersed in way more instead of just getting annoyed by. So that was my thoughts about it. I loved all the different backstories that came together. I loved the character development. I liked seeing everyone as human before we get to know Clark as Superman. There was another thing, not only like I immediately recognized the early 2000s vibe and energy. Smallville as a town, I spent, 6 years of my life growing up living in a town that was half the population of Smallville in Wyoming. Actually, no, I lived in a town that was a quarter of the population, but it was right next to like the bigger town that was 25,000 people. But the vibes of the small town are so specific, but very accurate. So another thing that made it believable for me.
First of all, I really love the fact. I loved hearing that. I loved hearing both of you guys' perspectives because Charles, the idea of that's how the way you described your view of Smallville before seeing it was how I had it as well. Because I had heard about Smallville too, and I had never knew what it was. I just knew it was Smallville, and I accidentally found out what it was from like a commercial where I was half listening, and somebody said, my name is Clark Kent. It was in the commercial, and I was like, wait a minute, what is that? And I was like, my Superman fan ears perked up, and I was like, hold up a second. And so then I just started checking it out, and then immediately went and bought like the first 2 seasons, and was just like, this is mine. I'm gonna have. Well, I didn't buy them. I begged my mom to buy them, and she bought them. But it's besides the point.
Back when you could beg a mom to buy you,
I did.
When you didn't have to afford them yourself.
Yeah, I begged my mom back in the day to buy me the Indiana Jones trilogy set, the box set, which had the little making of documentaries, and I'm like, I still have that in my box. I'm like, so I get that.
But so there's that level, and then also the comment you made about like, oh, when Clark is imagining having the fantasy of him and Lana, there's a ton of those moments in this series in general, especially, like I said, especially the first probably 4 seasons when he's in high school, that were one for one of my life in high school. And I remember it. It's one of the reasons why getting through high school was so much, not easier, but more manageable, was because I had Smallville. And a lot of those moments that Clark was going through, I was literally going through. I knew what it was like to like the girl that had a boyfriend, and there was no way that you were ever going to be she was never going to pick you, but she was always nice to you, and she was always your friend. And so you had this like weird thing where you imagined what it would be like if she was your girlfriend, and that kind of thing. And then, trying to figure out how to deal with, jealousy and wanting to be a part of some of the bigger things that are going on in life, but not really being allowed. My life was specifically very like that because you guys know this about me. I was raised Jehovah's Witnesses, and there's very specific things that we were allowed to do, like participating in sports. That was something we weren't allowed to do because for whatever reason, believed to be, I don't really remember what the reason was, but there was a very specific reason we weren't allowed to do that. So when I found out like Clark wasn't allowed to play football, I was like, I get that. I know what it's like to want to go do this thing and can't do it. And obviously I'm not an alien from a different planet, but like I do have parents that are like, you have to be, my mom, I had a mom who was very much like, you have to be mindful about the things you do and how you carry yourself, because it's gonna play into the man you're gonna become, and yada yada yada. And so I would hear those little parental pieces of advice that they would give Clark, and I would think, oh, it sounds like my mom, and I get it, and it sucks, but I still get it. And so I clung to it so much as a teenager, because I was like, I literally felt like my life was the same. I felt like an alien in majority of the situations that I was in, which I think is normal for most teenagers. But for me specifically, it was just something that just clicked with me. The other thing that I really like is, Jaylon, when you said, as somebody who's newer to the Superman world and coming at it from seeing Superman, the Christopher Reeve movie, and then seeing this, that's a perspective. I mean, I guess most of us have had that perspective because most of us saw Superman before we ever saw Smallville. But still, you've seen it more recently than, I had seen Superman, the Christopher Reeve movie, many, many years before I had seen Smallville. But you saw it like a few weeks ago. So it's like, this is like a real experience that you're having. And it's so excited to watch that you're having that experience and that it resonated in such a cool way with you. Because I think all the points that you hit really, really, really hit for me too, and I think it's what hit for a lot of fans of the show as well. So I think that's really, really, really cool. Those moments, all of those moments that were had. The music was also really good.
I will say, of all the early 2000s soup, the what in the early 2000s, the bops they still slap.
For sure.
I have two things to add to that. One, I don't like the songs. I don't like that's a 2000s thing. Like, it's just so obnoxious. But in this context, I was like, okay. The other thing is, and I'm gonna take off every Buffy fan right here. I can't stand the Bronze songs in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's the club they go to.
Oh, yeah.
Season 1 to season 7. I can't stand the music of the Bronze ever. So when I was listening to this, I was like, well, still better than the Bronze. I can't stand it. However, no, I was gonna say the cover of Wild Horses in the prom episode of Buffy, that had nothing to do with the Bronze, I don't think. So I was gonna say that's the exception, but no, it's not. Moving on.
So diving into what makes Clark and Lex have a compelling contrast. Now, Charles, you did mention you liked Michael Rosenbaum and Tom Welling. I also did growing up, and see, I agree with Jaylon when she says that Christopher Reeve is the hands down Clark Kent. He's the best Clark Kent. I think that I've always said that. I think he's the best Clark Kent. The reason why I've never included Tom Welling in that category is because he is not that version of Clark Kent yet. The bumbling, foolish, clumsy fool that we know him to be later on, he's not that. He's still trying. He's just a teenager who's automatically awkward and automatically, all of that. And so from that perspective, I see him as a very different type of Clark Kent.
Also, hang on. You just got me thinking again. Another little detail that I loved is, they're making jokes about his clumsiness and his awkwardness as a teenager. And they said, he can't get within 5 feet of Lana Lang without tripping. But she was wearing the kryptonite necklace! I was like, it all makes sense!
Side note about that, not about the kryptonite, but about Lana Lang. If you've ever seen Superman 3, Lana Lang is played by Annette O'Toole in Superman 3, and she plays Clark Kent's mom in Smallville. So it is it's a little weird, but it's totally fine. But that's just one of the cool, funny things that that I always loved when I was a kid. Superman 3, weirdly enough, when I was younger, was one of my favorite Superman movies. I don't know why, I just really liked it. I loved Richard Pryor in it, and I loved the whole Superman fighting Clark in the dump scene. I always loved that for some strange reason. I always loved the scene where the hero becomes a lesser version of themselves and does things that they wouldn't ordinarily do for a little while. Maybe not forever, but for a little while. So when Superman blows out the torch in the Olympics in Superman 3, I was like, oh man, that's it's silly, but in the grand scheme of things, when I was a kid, I was like, oh, that's badass. What if you did that? Because and so Smallville has those moments too, where you have what they call the red kryptonite episodes, which you guys have not seen, because those are all, well, they pretty much have one every single season after season 1. So season 1 doesn't have any of it, but season 2 is the first time you get to see Clark with red kryptonite, and you will love it or you will hate it. I don't know which. I've always loved them because because you spend the whole first season of watching Clark be this morally good person that's just like has a good conscience to like suddenly, I'm tired of this nickel and diamond shit, mom and dad. And it's kind of hilarious. But like, and he buys like, Wave Runner and a big screen TV and like moves to Metropolis for like a week, and it's just like hilarious to me. Of like Clark being bad is kind of funny.
That's
It's also
amazing.
Tom Welling's favorite episodes to play, besides the transference episode, which when he switches bodies with Lionel Luthor, which is also one of the greatest performances on that show. If you never watch another episode, specifically find Transference and watch that episode, because it is the mannerisms of Clark doing John Glover's performance, where Tom Welling performs like he's John Glover, but he just gets it down to the minute mannerisms of John Glover that is crazy. And then John Glover doing the minute mannerisms of Tom Welling is just I'm like, oh my god, this is what acting is.
That's
But
always so fascinating to me. I love when you get to see an actor's range and see how well they impersonate the little quirks.
For sure. So, all of that said, let's talk about the first meeting. So we're talking about Clark and Lex, and I know we're half an hour in now, and we're just now getting to the point. But I'm sorry, this was going to be one of those episodes. But so we're talking about our first meeting, the car crash. How do you think that the car crash set up the dynamic between Clark and Lex? And do you think it did it well?
I would say it was one of the only ways you could level the playing field, in the sense that they could become friends. Lex owing Clark his life balances out the power dynamics of Clark does not have the kind of money and influence that Lex does, and he would never be at that level. So I think that it's one of the only ways the playing field could have been leveled, with Clark owing Lex something that Lex couldn't pay in money that he had, that opened the door for them to actually strike up a friendship as opposed to an acquaintance.
Yeah, I think it did an interesting job, because very quickly it was Luthor cannot get what he wants from Clark, and Clark cannot give what he wants to Lex, because Clark would just love to just explain away everything and not have to be bound by the secrecy for various, reasons. I don't know if they ever bring up the government, watching them or something in Smallville, but that's basically what there is a Elseworlds kind of story of Clark getting captured by the government, and it's really scary. But then for Luthor, basically he talks with money, because that's what he knows. So his whole thing is, here, take this, even out the playing field, do something, and Clark's not giving it to him. The Kents aren't giving it to him. And that kind of fascination but frustration. But also I think it's interesting that immediately, he mentions about the hair, automatically, where it's like, oh, well, no one ever understood me because of the hair. And I think it's interesting that they're both these weird kids. There's always something that separates them. So really, Luthor just really wants something, but he can't get it. If he can't get it, drives that wedge. And I thought that was interesting, because I was wondering, how are they gonna set that up? I'm like, are they always friends? Are they childhood friends? And so I was kind of curious, and when I saw this, I was like, oh, that's really smart, because it's not a childhood thing. It's like a teenage friend thing, which is different from children friendships. So I thought that was really interesting. Of basically, they want something from each other that they can't get, and they know that. So it's like this weird push-pull thing that I thought was really interesting. Thematically, I was like, that was the hook for me. I was like, that's really interesting. And again, has nothing really to do with, and they will become mortal enemies in the future. It was just this interesting thing between them, which I thought was really cool.
I love the way you worded that.
I think the other cool thing about this whole thing is they literally smash into each other. And this is something I think readers or writers can learn too about, especially because this show is a prime example of friends to enemies thing. It's like, if you take everything out of this show, if you remove all of the melodrama, romance, and all of that kind of stuff, and you focus solely on this part of the story of The story of Clark to Superman is the story of Lex and Clark, because if you watch the whole series, you do see that a big part of Clark becoming the person that he's ultimately going to become is in big part because of the decisions that are made by Lex and the relationships that they have. And this again is a story of friends to enemies, which is always a really compelling story. I love friends to enemy stories. Some great ones that have happened. We just talked about this, Obi-Wan and Anakin. Are a great example of that, of those kinds of moments. The Wicked series is another example of that, and so it's a fascinating thing. But I think very rarely, and if you're going to do one like this, when you have these friends have their little meet cute, if you will, for lack of a better term, bury the reason for their destruction within their meeting. And this very concept of the car crash is the burying of why Lex and Clark's relationship doesn't work out in the end, because it's the planting of the seed of Lex's obsession with Clark, his family, and the truth. And I've mentioned this before. I mentioned this, I think, in the last episode when we had Jess on, was the reason why ultimately Lex and Clark's friendship ends. From Lex's perspective, is the fact that Clark never is honest with him, and that Lex ultimately just wanted Clark to trust him. And that if he had just trusted him, Lex would have never been what he became. That's the argument that's often given. I don't always know if I agree with that completely, because if you do watch that whole series, Lex does a lot of shit that, like, even if Clark did trust him, I don't know if he would be necessarily a good person per se. He has very good reasons for it, but all of his decisions ultimately stem back to him lying in that field, in the cornfield, watching that ship come down and seeing that, and his obsession with things. There's things in this world that are different, that have made me different, that are just abnormal, and I have to figure out why. And that's the thing that drives Lex from the beginning. And then he meets Clark in a moment that can't be explained in any other way other than this has to be either alien or divine or something not normal happened here. And he never gets that answer. And so everything that he does throughout the series is constantly chasing that answer. And he seeks it in Clark. He seeks it in who's ultimately becomes his best friend. And Clark's, fear of what would happen if Lex knew, if anybody knew, ultimately forces him to push Lex away, and that's what destroys him. And you find that right in this exact moment. The first interaction that he has with his friend is a lie. That's the first thing that he does. And that sets the tone. So when you are doing friends to enemies, bury the destruction in the introduction. Whether it be with a lie, whether it be with a betrayal that doesn't necessarily seem like a betrayal at first to either one of them, but ultimately turns out to be. Great example of that as well is in Mufasa, with Taka and Mufasa and their relationship, which I'm not going to get into it, but like overall is a great example of that whole burying the destruction of their friendship in the opening of their friendship, where Taka saves Mufasa from the beginning. He saves him from drowning, and ultimately does this thing of self-sacrifice for Mufasa. And it's that self-sacrifice that Mufasa tries to repay to Taka, but ultimately can't when it comes to Sarabi. And therefore, oddly enough, it's a woman that comes between them, similar to Clark and Lex. Although the truth is really what comes between Clark and Lex, but it's also kind of a woman. I'm not going to give you guys spoilers, but like, it's a woman.
I really love that from the perspective of someone who has seen the full story, because I wouldn't have picked up on that after only watching a few episodes. But I love...
Oh yeah, you won't see it coming, I promise you. And it's going to be one of those... And I also say that to tell you this, that woman issue happens in season 6. So take that for you what you will, as this is now after season 5, where just all the decisions from this point on are just... These are choices. These were things that people decided.
I was going to say, the idea of burying the destruction, the thing that ultimately tears your friendship apart and turns you into enemies, burying that right from the beginning and letting it be a thorn in the side of the friendship from the very beginning is a very good point.
It also mirrors real life, by the way.
I would also throw out there too, because you brought this up, it doesn't even necessarily have to be so melodramatic as a car crash or
Mhm.
Rose Stole My Hoe. Okay, side note, by the way, I haven't seen Mufasa, but I did hear the soundtrack and I was like, oh, this is really good. And I heard that last song and I was like, there better be a really good freaking reason that they decided Bro Stole My Hoe is the reason. I'm like, okay, fine. I hate the Disney Corporation, but you're such a fan. Yeah, I know, but I hate them with a fiery passion. Moving on. But the point being is, even if I liked it, it's melodramatic, right? It's more heightened drama. The reason I bring that up is that the meeting between Obi-Wan and Anakin is actually hospitable. He actually extends his hand in friendship. But even then, it's not necessarily something they do. It's the fact that Obi-Wan has been given this thing that he is not ready to deal with, to teach. It's not his time, it's not his student, but he is given something. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be, I would say, a thing that the two characters do so much as their context as well, which I think is pretty solid of a degree. Also, another example too recently is with Transformers 1, they actually do show
Mm.
in that movie Megatron and Optimus first meeting, and immediately you have this sense, understanding of Optimus's optimism and positivity and Megatron's idealism right then and there.
Mm.
So it doesn't even have to be melodramatic. Your
For
point
sure.
is very true, but I was also going to say there's another dimension to it that doesn't even have to be something out of Greek mythology,
Right.
as it were. It can literally just be context
I
and
agree.
philosophy.
I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I think in all friends to enemy stories, it is kind of, you can usually find it. You can usually find the thing that's going to tear them apart in the beginning. It's, you don't always see it in, those are the best stories when you don't see how it's going to play out, but it's there. And when you go back and look at it again, it's like, oh, I should have seen that from the beginning, that's what that was going to tear them apart. I think another interesting contrast between Lex and Clark is their backgrounds.
Yeah.
And they make
Oh,
that,
jeez.
and they do a really good job of making that very, very clear. And they do that throughout the series. They continue to kind of show that difference between the way, not just poor to rich, but also parents. Clark's parents, the Kents are. It's one of the things I think Smallville did really, really, really well all the way through, at least until Jonathan dies. But
This one too, son of a bitch.
yeah,
Jonathan has to live,
No!
people. I bet you in the new movie, the first trailer, they're like, "Oh, Jonathan's there." I bet you it's a flashback.
I have a feeling, yeah.
People. Like it
And then they
was the
kind of,
one time.
his mom doesn't die or anything, but his mom kind of fades out, which is why I kind of hated that, how they dropped the ball with his mom a few seasons after Jonathan dies. That happens, but then they make some really strange choices with how she chooses to move on. I don't know. I really don't know if you guys are going to make it to the end of all the way to all 10 seasons. So I feel like there's stuff I want to tell you, but I also don't want to ruin it for you if you do decide to take that trek, because it is a trek. It's a long, long journey to get there. But yeah, there are choices that are made that I don't know about. That's one of them. But overall, Lionel Luthor is a great contrast to Jonathan, and we don't see as much of Lionel in the first season as you do later on, because in the first season he's more of a reoccurring character. He becomes a full-time character in season 2, and so you get to see that more robust look at Lex and Lionel's relationship. But as the show goes on, this goes back to that first meeting, seeds planted and things like that happen. One of the things that we notice about Lex from the beginning is that he does envy Clark's upbringing. He envies his parents, his father, his mom, and that thing, because his family is just so fucked up that it's just kind of like that way. And so as the series goes on, when Lionel has this kind of come to Jesus moment or whatever, and ends up becoming a father figure to Clark, it all leads into this very, you stole everything from me and I hate you so much. Because like, the saddest thing I will say about Lex, and I say this because, and before I ask you this question, the saddest thing about Lex is there's a part in the series where he admits to Lionel that the only thing he has ever wanted for his dad to do, he never wanted the money, he never wanted the company, he never wanted any of the things. All he's ever wanted was his dad to tell him he loved him. That was it. And he never tells Lionel that. He tells everybody else that, and then when Lionel asks him, "What do you want from me? Just tell me what you want from me." He's like, "You'll never give it to me anyway." We as the audience know because we've heard him say it elsewhere, but it was like the saddest thing. And when you know that, and then you watch the way that Lex interacts with Jonathan and not Lana, sorry, Martha, it's so sad, really. Lex is just a tragic character in general, I think, which is interesting for the whole contrasting because Clark is anything but a tragic character. But how do you guys feel that the backgrounds of these two characters' families shape them as individual characters, but also as friends, and later on as enemies?
I immediately felt the pain and the tension in Lex's story, which immediately made me think there's gonna be a huge implosion later. Because no one can, it's very, very difficult to carry that much pain when you are unsupported. But with Clark, he has a supportive family. So even if he's going through the pain of being a teenager and finding out he's not even from this planet, he has supportive people around him who are going to help him turn that pain. We talked about this on the Hadestown episode. When you have pain, you can either turn it into a productive thing or a destructive thing. And that largely depends on who you surround yourself with, because no one's strong enough to do this life thing alone.
Yeah, for me, something I find fascinating is that it's Lex that gives the truck, right? Not his dad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I find that fascinating that Lex doesn't, I don't think he picks up on what that means to just ordinary people, because Lex doesn't know that you can't buy people like that, because he only has this one influence, this domineering influence. I mean, Lord, the whole thing with his dad yelling at him over a helicopter to look out and be brave because they're going to lose everything is, it tells you everything right there. But it reminds me too that this is an interesting connection here. To make a long story short, there's this bit in Ultimate Spider-Man, which is basically a series that I grew up reading, where it's like, forget the rest of the continuity, we're going to restart Spider-Man in the modern day. And the modern day was 2001. So now it's dated, but back in the day, it was new. But there's this bit where Norman Osborn tries to invite Aunt May and Peter over for dinner, and Peter knows he's the Green Goblin, and Osborn knows that he's Spider-Man, but he can't tell Aunt May. So he makes up kind of this thing. He's like, oh, Osborn's kind of a weird guy, da 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 da. And Aunt May picks up on this. Basically, I can't remember what the phrase is that she says, I've never met a guy who was super rich who didn't do these horrible things to get it. And he's like, what? And he goes, she says it's something your Uncle Ben used to say. And when Jonathan pushes away that truck, so we're not going to deal with it. That's what that reminded me of, that sense of they know how the real world works versus Lex doesn't, because he's in corporation googly mock land. And I find that really fascinating, because the great thing about Superman has always been, well, why is he the way he is? And it's like, well, he was raised by his family. And I thought that was brilliant, because that's great, but there's this underlying fascistic ideology to it. It's very like hammer and sickle. Well, the only reason that Clark is good is because he was raised by farmers. If he was raised by no good enough for nothing Californians, he wouldn't be good. And I'm saying that's part of it, but there is kind of, you could argue, the only reason Clark's a good kid is because he got raised on a farm. But I thought even in this pilot, it showed he lived in the real world, which is the example is he can't sit by and do nothing. He has to go save these people from getting hurt. And he doesn't do anything with Lana because that's the reality of the situation. It doesn't shock him. Lex, on the other hand, doesn't quite know how to. I mean, literally, Clark goes to his mansion and he starts talking about, what does he say? Like we're a different breed, Clark. There's a bit from Sungwon Cho, who's a voice actor, and he does YouTube skits, and he did this joke where it's like when you're playing a video game and there's going to be a character who betrays you, and he goes like, oh, it's nice to meet you, and the other character goes, this world isn't perfect, and he goes like, what? If only I could wipe away the imperfections. And this is something I simply joke about all the time. Like every time there's a dark character, it's like, this world isn't perfect. But that's what I'm saying is like Lex starts talking like, oh, we're a different breed, we're bigger for destined things, and Clark's just like, I just got to get to class kind of thing. But I think it's indicative of how they were raised. That honestly, if you put Jonathan and Martha in scumbag New York City, I think Clark still would have turned out to be who he is, even if he was in like, I don't know, 70s New York or something, because they taught him the real world and the real values versus Lex. He's evil. His father's evil because this is what he is. I mean, hell. So why is Lex supposed to run the factory in
Yeah.
Smallville?
He's banished there to train,
His
to
father is
become.
training him to run a fertilizer factory. Number 3, by the way. Fertilizer factory. If that doesn't say anything,
Yeah.
But again, it's kind of the grandiosity, because probably in his dad's point of view, my son learned the real value of leadership by working at a fertilizer factory. He probably wants his son, I imagine, through the show, to become something great by virtue of, again, the Greek myth. The Kents just want their boy to be safe and to be okay. And if it happens to be that he's realizing I can use my powers for good, A-okay. But I think that's kind of the difference. And honestly, the fact that big old Superman fan here for decades aside, the fact that I could get that from the pilot, I think is pretty indicative and showing of these two characters.
For sure. I agree with that completely. And I think that that's the thing about Lex and Clark in this show, too, is you hit the nail on the head, especially when it comes to character. Because as the show goes on, you get to see that. I think it even happens in the pilot where, like, Lex is talking to Clark about Lana and their ideas on how to approach that. There are multiple times where Lex is like, I'm going to buy you guys a limo and tickets for a concert, and you guys are just going to go. And Clark's like, she has a boyfriend. And Lex is like, listen, that's an obstacle. You need to, it's just kind of like.
Okay, but I wish I had someone like that when I was that age.
Clark is just like, I'm not going to do, like, that's not right. And Lex is just like, these petty little problems that you're talking about, like, get rid of the dude. And, do you want me to get rid of him? Like, it's the kind of relationship that they have. And but it's interesting how they approach things. And you talk about the truck is also a great example of that, of how, like, in Lex's world, friends buy each other extravagant gifts, and that's how friendship is formed, and that's how friendships are maintained. In Clark's world, come over to somebody's house and you say something, you talk to them, you interact with them like a human being. And so that they're very different in that sense. And you kind of get the sense that Clark is going to be a good influence on Lex. For a while, it feels like that's exactly what happens. Lex starts to make better decisions, and there's certain things that he won't do because of, his relationship with Clark. And as that obsession grows, that darkness that he has kind of grows as well. The thing I will point out about friends to enemies, it's a moment that happens, and this happens in season 7. This is the last season that Lex is in the that Michael Rosenbaum is in the show. But keep in mind also another fair point for the writers of Smallville, so you guys know that they didn't just go off the rails for no reason.
Like,
season
Rosenbaum
5 was supposed
fired,
to,
wasn't he?
yeah. The two showrunners, they left after season 5, but also it's because season 5 was supposed to be the last season of the show. But the studio was like, this is making us money, keep it going. So Miles and Al were like, nah, we're good. And so they brought in new people, and then it just became weird. As well as I think it also kind of succumbed to the curse of the thing I told you about, Jaylon, where when you have a show that has 20-something episodes for over the course of many, many years, the quality is just going to suffer eventually.
Yep.
At least, unless, of course, you're like Star Trek Next Generation or something like that, where it's just like, where it's just like meant, for some reason, the quality stays no matter how long you go on. Or, Law and Order, where that's a whole other thing. But,
you got it right the first time.
Should have stopped talking. Oh no, but
I have problems with SVU.
I think everybody has problems with SVU. SVU is a problematic show.
Yeah.
I say this to say,
one of the first examples of the shame of being Latino. Well, yes, but that's a different conversation.
Say this, that says season 7, there's a scene in season 7 which I wish I could pull it up and show you guys, but it's this awesome moment of, at this point, Clark and Lex are no longer friends. Like, that's already established by that point. They're no longer friends. They've already reached that point. But there's this thing where Chloe tries to kill Lex with like a rocket launcher. So she shoots a rocket at him. It's like a small explosive device, but she shoots it at him. And Clark is standing right next to Lex, and he slows down time, as Clark tends to do, to do it. and the rocket is coming, and there's this split second where you watch Clark watch the rocket, and he hesitates on moving Lex out of the way, and then finally moves him out of the way because it's that. But that moment to me always encapsulated the difference between Lex and Clark, because we all know that Lex would have been like, "See ya," but Clark, like, and it showed the humanity in Clark, that he was just like, should I let this dude die? I probably should let this dude die. But he's like, I can't let this dude die, and he saves him. But it's, when you think about that moment, I feel like that's one of the most pivotal moments of the series compared to that moment on the car crash. The only scene that's more pivotal than that is season 10, when they brought Michael Rosen back for the series finale. And he and Clark have this conversation of, like, Lex admits that he knows the truth about Clark's powers and all of that. And like, how if you had just told me the truth, all of this could have been so different, that kind of thing. But that conversation, they tie it so perfectly to that bridge crash, and it's like the last time we see Lex and Clark together. And a scene, it's stupid the way that they move forward with the whole, like, how Lex doesn't know that Clark is Superman in the future.
Because I was going to say, that'd be really interesting. Like, imagine Luthor hating Clark Kent.
Yeah, and that's what I was hoping. They were like, nope, can't have that. And it's such a stupid way that they did it. But
it's the final episode.
Yes, exactly. They do something that Jaylon hates a great deal when it comes to Lex. I
picked out the love triangle. It was like, immediately, I am not here for this.
But the whole killing a character and bringing them back to life thing,
for no good reason. Asterisk. For no good reason.
Well, Lex Luthor is a character that they kill and they bring him back to life. But they don't really bring him back to life. They clone him. So it's technically not even the original Lex. So technically they didn't really bring him back to life. But
Rick and Morty says the alternate dimension. First of all, we've been doing the alternate dimension thing since a long ass time. I can't stand that either. Oh, it's the same person. I'm like, no, it's not. It's different.
No.
The only one that did that perfectly, actually, was Guardians of the Galaxy 3. That was surprisingly a brilliant detail of that, which is actually because James Gunn embraced the problematic nature of that. They're technically alive because of the alternate timeline thing. So, sorry, that's a geeky rant. I'm sorry.
We love them. We love them here.
Yes.
So here's another question for you guys. How do you feel Smallville's pilot foreshadows future conflicts for Lex and Clark? What were some of the ones that you picked out that were like, oh, that sets up some stuff?
Other than the one that I said I actually thought was interesting was not Luthor picking up the kryptonite necklace. That's obvious. It's that he goes, "You want me to drive you? I can help. I can do something." And Clark goes, "Nope." That right there. Because I love whenever there's characters like that, when you just keep kind of pushing them and pushing them and pushing them. So the thing is, Luthor is only going to take that ever so long until he can't. And I find that stuff really interesting, not just because people are naturally pressure cookers, but like, I've always found it really interesting when you have characters who are like, I want to do good or I want to do something, and they keep getting denied and denied and denied. Eventually they're going to snap. And I find that really, really fascinating. So that was the one I instantly picked up on. And again, it ties into what Luthor wants to be but can't, as well as Clark, his own nature of, I have to do this. So he doesn't really think, he just does it, which I think is really sad. Because I actually thought Luthor was going to help after that. I was like, oh, okay, he's the one that pulls him down from the cross, which I always thought was interesting too, that like Luthor's the one that literally pulls him down, because I get this feeling that Luthor probably saves his arse a lot of times, which is one of those like, you know, I should have killed you when I had the chance things, which I love. I think that's so sad with the characters where it's like, I should have killed you, but if I did, I think that's so brilliant and sad.
Yeah, the kryptonite one for sure. I think just in general, like from the very first scene where Lionel is yelling at Lex in the helicopter, you immediately get the sense that this character is going to be carrying a lot of pain, and eventually he's going to crack, is going to implode. Again, this is from the perspective of someone who doesn't quite know, like, all the canon of the Superman story, so I feel like I have less to contribute to this discussion. I really love the points that you and Charles are bringing up. It's just fun to listen. But I did, like, even from someone who had very little education, I did immediately feel that foreboding, that foreshadowing of Lex is eventually going to crack. And once he does, he's going to know how to destroy Superman. Because he's just quietly been observing and playing the friend this whole time.
If it wasn't for the fact that Man of Steel is just underneath mediocre and nothing special, that's right, I said it, and I don't care because it's not a big deal for me to say it. I did not insult anyone's Christ figure. Moving on. If it wasn't for that, I think Jaylon is could have a really interesting opinion on Man of Steel. Just listening to you say things, I'm like, interesting. So I don't
We will
think
see.
she will, because it's not that interesting of a film anyway.
Oh my god.
It's not a big deal.
Stop hurting me.
It's not a big deal. You're hurting, not you, Jared, but other people. You're hurting me. There are better stories. There are better movies. Anyway,
We are
Yep.
here to hurt each other's feelings.
it's just not that interesting one way or the other, but whatever.
I
Back
think
to the topic,
you,
I apologize.
you also have Jonathan. The interesting thing about Jonathan and Lionel's relationship is you find this out a little bit later, because when we first meet Lionel and Lex and all that, and they're in the helicopter and they're going to do the whatever deal they're going to do. I forget if they talk about it in the actual pilot, but they're ultimately going to steal the Ross farm. And that's what they're going to do. You find that out a little bit later, that's why Pete hates Lex so much and he hates Lionel so much, because they ultimately screwed his family out of their farm. But what you find out even more than that is that in order to make Clark's adoption legal, Jonathan had to go to Lionel to, do his rich people thing and, help them fabricate fake documents. But to do that, Lionel said, introduce me to some of the other farmers and I will do this for you. And in Jonathan doing that, he ultimately set the path for Lionel to ultimately screw over the Rosses and many other people. So Jonathan hates Lionel for that reason, amongst many others, but that is the main one reason why he can't stand Lionel. I hated Lionel for a very long time, not even because of anything he did to Lex, but purely because of what he does to Jonathan, and I will always hate him for it, but I also love him later as he becomes a better person. And technically what he does to Jonathan is not really his fault. It just kind of happens, but it's kind of sad. But anyway, all of that aside, that relationship plays into the relationship that Clark and Lex have, in the sense of everything. When Jonathan says, I want you to think about where the money came from to buy that truck, all of his decisions, all of his thoughts, all of it is stewing back to that. And I think that leads a big part into the relationship that Lex and Clark will ultimately have down the line. I think the other thing, when you talk about removing the kryptonite around from Clark, I think the interesting thing about that is the fact that Lana's kryptonite necklace symbolically is the one thing that keeps him from getting close to her, the girl that he cares about. And in essence, it symbolically keeps him from getting close to other people. And it's ironic that the person who removes the thing from his neck that keeps him from getting close to other people is the one person that he refuses to actually trust, that ultimately becomes his enemy. So it's kind of, yeah, no. So, and I didn't really think about that until recently. My God, I wish I was this cool when I was a kid. I wish I had an understanding of story the way that I do now then. Because
you had boobies on the brain at this age.
So true. So true. So true. I was a horny little teenage boy. So I wasn't thinking about why stories made sense.
You're looking for UFOs, but when you're a teenager, it's boobies in the sky.
This is leading.
We went in the wrong direction. Sorry about that. No, but yeah. So those are some of the other interesting things about their relationship and how it all goes. I think trust is the key factor, and you get those moments in Smallville so many times where like you watch Lex and Clark interact with each other, and it's like, just tell him. Like those moments where Clark could, and if you think about like what would have happened, because I do that. I love those. When Charles was talking about headcanon, I do it all the time where I'm just like, imagine the world of what it would have been like if Clark had just told Lex. All the times where Lex would have protected him, kept his secret. And Lex even says that later on. I would have kept your secret. I would have protected you. I would have kept you from, we could have done this whole saving the world thing together. And Clark can't deny it. It's the one thing where it's like, how sometimes the villain is wrong and the villain is wrong, but it's one of those things where it's like, technically speaking, everything that Lex is saying is the truth. And Clark was completely wrong for doing that. And I understand why he does it, but it's still, and the weird thing too is that you see him multiple times over the course of the series have these realizations, not just with Lex, but with Pete, with Chloe, with Lana, where he repeatedly watches what happens when he doesn't tell them the truth. And inevitably, he does end up telling pretty much all of them. They all end up finding out eventually, in different times. The saddest of all is Pete leaving the show. I don't know why Pete left the show. He shouldn't have left the show, but he does leave the show pretty early on. But he's also the first one to really know. And I think Chloe's the next one. Which Chloe's awesome. She's a horrible person in real life, but she is.
That's the person, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Right, I was trying to find him.
Yeah, she went to prison for technically it was like she was a part of a sex cult and she was participating in sex trafficking and all kinds of other horrible things. She's out of prison now, but she did go to prison for that. So it's really hard to watch her on the show now when you know, like, oh, she was actually during the show she was recruiting people. The funny thing, sorry, this is a side note, but the funny thing is she tried to recruit Kristen Krug, the woman who plays Lana, and Lana was going to actually join, but she changed her mind last second. So which is crazy.
So her, Bryan Singer, Kevin Spacey. There's a recurring theme here. The Superman.
Surrounding Superman.
Is it the cape? I don't understand.
Is it the cape?
I make a joke because it's so bleeped up, man. Anyway.
But yeah, so that's besides the point. But yeah, you have and then of course you have Lana and all of that and Lois. And so I think ultimately almost everybody finds out at some point that Clark has powers. It's kind of like Arrow where like everybody found out that Oliver was the Green Arrow eventually. I was just like, and it's kind of becomes like a running joke of like, are we just telling everyone now? Like but like, this is another reason why I said it gets worse as it goes, but you will forgive it because you spent 5 years with it already. So you're just kind of like, I've been here, I'm halfway through, I might as well see where this all goes. But yeah, so I think that those are some of the interesting foreshadowing things. Here's another question. What are some other great protagonist antagonist contrasts in fiction? Specifically, I'm going to throw some out there, and then outside of those, you guys can throw in Batman and the Joker. We know them. Two extreme responses to trauma. We got Magneto and Professor Xavier. Same goal, but different methods. We got Sherlock and Moriarty. Genius versus genius, but order versus chaos. There are many, many others. What are some of you guys' favorites? Or at least one of your favorites if you want to narrow it down. Usually none of us narrow anything down around here. So if you want to just lay out some of your favorites, go for it.
Dang, it's hard because a lot of the stories that I like, the conflict in the story is either man versus nature or man versus himself. Those are the stories that I really love.
I mean, those are their protagonist antagonist contrasts even within those, I think.
Fair.
What about you, Charles?
Well, I'll say first of all, I do want to clarify. When I do criticize Man of Steel, it's just from like a personal opinion thing. I don't want to make everyone feel bad. I want to clarify. There's a whole world of geeky jerks out there, usually men, and I don't want to be them. So just to clarify, for have that on the record, like as long as you're honorable and decent, like without will. Moving on. One that does pop up because we have to talk about this at some point. Talking about pilots. Is Goliath and Xanatos in Gargoyles, because you have such a calculating guy who always gets what he wants, and Goliath is such an old soul, and they just clash perfectly, but they respect each other. But in an interesting way, I was going to say, honestly, I really do like the Superman Lex Luthor rivalry, but I think I'm gonna reference this one subject because it actually ties into why I love the Luthor Superman stuff. Is I love in Doctor Who the Doctor versus the Daleks, and the reason why this is really specific is so in Doctor Who there's sometimes recurring baddies, but the main three are the Cybermen, which is I'll put it for see if they're like the Borg from TNG, put it that way to be simple. The Master, which is basically his Moriarty. Right. But the Daleks are the most famous ones. But the reason why that I find them very fascinating is that they were the really cool baddies before the reboot. And then the reboot, they gave them this really dark personal connection between them. But the reason I find them really fascinating as the rival is that the Doctor is this alien who travels throughout time and space and wants to learn all these things and explore and meet people. And he spreads this message of tolerance and peace and not being the worst person, but the best version of yourself. So every time there's a companion, if they live, that's a different conversation. When they leave the TARDIS, they're changed. They're better people. The Daleks are the exact opposite of that. The whole thing about the Daleks is kill everything that's not them. And I know there's the old hat argument of like, oh, they're the Nazis. Yes. But I think it goes a little bit deeper than just, throw a swastika on them or something. The Daleks hate everything. So if you've ever heard a Dalek where they go like, exterminate, the whole reason why is that they're screaming. They're literally angry and screaming and hating everything that is not them, and they want to kill everything that is not them. It's the exact opposite of the Doctor, but also like the Doctor, they can time travel and they're freaking impervious, etc., etc. So I think what I'm trying to say is I like rivalries that they don't necessarily have to be frenemies or not frenemies or whatever, but I like when they're not idealistically opposed foes, but more like they represent the exact opposite. Because I think it's just interesting where it's like you meet someone, you go, that's amazing, and then you see this other person, you go, oh god, that's terrible. I find that really fascinating because I think it makes you appreciate the good in the hero. So with Superman, he has all these amazing powers, he can kill us all, but he chooses to be good. You go, that's wonderful. And then you look at Luthor, who basically, go turn on the news right now, you can hear him, though that's been the case for several years in any case. But the point being is, they run the world. That's what Luthor is. And you go, oh God. But in that sense of reality, you look at that and you go, what if there was a person more like Superman? And so there is a sense of hope. So it's a very interesting thematic as well as just entertainment thing. Because literally, Superman wears a circus outfit, or as I've heard now, a pro wrestler outfit, which is a genius interpretation. Luthor wears a business suit. That's visually fascinating to me.
I caught your Hamilton reference, and so I'm going to say Hamilton because
that is a good one.
You have Hamilton, he makes it his entire life mission to be contrary, and he takes a firm stand on everything that he believes in, and it becomes his identity that he wants to build his legacy around, whereas Burr doesn't want to make any waves because he doesn't want to be a target for other people to shoot at. So that's one great. And that's another example of friends to enemies. So, thank you for jogging my memory there, Charles. With the next two...
That was just habit.
That was beautiful. With the next two, I'm really going to expose the kind of crazy niches I'm stuck in. And one of my childhood shows, Barbie and the 12 Dancing Princesses.
Okay, you went deep. She went into the deep cuts.
To be fair, that was the only Barbie movie I ever watched. But it was very good. It was interesting, as a young girl, it was interesting to see the antagonist, the villain, being the one who is trying to control the girlhood and the femininity of these other female characters, and that is her entire plan, to take over the kingdom. And for Genevieve and her sisters, they're wild, carefree spirits that don't conform to any societal expectations or sensibilities is exactly what's able to stop the villain. So, take that as you will. Also, the other one I was going to say is, this is going to be a stretch because it's a comedy, but I Love Lucy. I feel like conflict there is against Lucy's chaos and the mundane life. Because mundane life can break you down, and it can just keep picking at you until it destroys you. But with Lucy's hilarious chaos, it never has the chance to.
That's a very interesting interpretation of I Love Lucy that I've never thought of before.
That's solid, though. That is solid. I'm with it. I am with it. Okay, so for me, I got one option, and that is Shoshana Dreyfus and Aldo Rain, as they're both the protagonist, and their antagonist being Colonel Hans Landa, all from the movie Inglourious Bastards, which to me, so I'm sure many of us can argue that there are better. Many of you guys may have other opinions as to like what is the best film we should watch if we want to talk about villains. But to me, my all-time favorite villain ever has always been Hans Landa from Inglourious Bastards. Christoph Waltz is just amazing in everything that he does. But in this particular role, there's something, I don't know, there's something really, really sinister to me about polite villains. I always like polite villains because they're scary as hell, especially polite villains that are capable of extremely violent outbursts or massive amounts of violence in some way, shape, or form. And Hans is a character that is expertly capable of doing horrible and horrendous things, but for some reason has this very polite and charming tone to him. But then you have Shoshana and you have Aldo, and they within themselves are contrasting characters, protagonist-wise. They have very different motivations, very different reasons for doing what they're doing. Although Brad Pitt's character is pretty much just about, we're hunting Nazis, and that's what it's all about. I want to kill some Nazis, and I want some Nazi scalps, and that's what it is. And then Shoshana has a very personal anger towards the Nazis in the sense that they killed her family. So she's kind of just like, I want them dead. And so Aldo seems to be a more outbursty, angry, not angry, but more loudly bold and proud protagonist. Shoshana is a little quieter, but she's also very small within her little rage. But then you have Hans, which is a wonderful contrast of this. He's just very peacockish in the way of how he does what he does. And I love that there's that level of contrast between them. It's also the way that it's laid out between specifically Shoshana and Hans, because their story is directly linked to one another. Her revenge, besides Hitler himself, her vengeance is really with Hans. She wants to kill Hans. And you know from the beginning, just like in Smallville, there is this huge conflict that is going to happen somewhere down the line. And and you just kind of have to watch it just to see it. I've known people who have watched Smallville just to see how Clark and Lex become enemies. So those would be my favorite as far as protagonist, antagonist contrasting in fiction. Last question I have for us is, what are the common mistakes writers make when they are trying to create contrast? There are some that I have in mind, but I'm curious as to what you guys think some of the common things people do when it comes to that.
I think it's obvious contrasts, and they're not very believable. It's very, very much, it feels like a teacher gave an assignment and said they have to be contrasting. So they go red versus blue. Ta-da! And that's how it can kind of feel like that. And I will say from my experience too, what you tend to do is you start to overemphasize something. So it's like you go, I'm going to stick so far in the dawn, in the daytime, that'll automatically get me contrasted from the nighttime. And you start getting so obsessed about the daytime that you forget the sun moves and has shadows and can be covered by clouds or some clouds. And the sun has a different relationship with parts of the planet. And when you lose track of that, it doesn't feel like a real sun. It feels like it's forced. I can't think of any examples now, but just my personal experience, I'm trying to think of. So my first baby, that's what I call it. Golly, I'm so ashamed I haven't finished this the way I want to, because I got replaced by my second baby, unfortunately. Which even the word saying replaced makes me feel sick. Anyway, moving on. But I had one character who was going to be very brass and very, energetic and just in your face, and there was going to be another character who's going to be very quiet and the opposite. It's like, okay, there's dichotomy, but you've seen that a million times. And I feel as it was developing, I was like, there has to be some kind of flaw to the energetic character, because it can't just be like, cowboy, boom, I get everything automatically. And that became part of the character, whereas like, it's not that he makes mistakes, it's that he wants to be a leader and doesn't necessarily know how. And then I thought of this quiet character. I said, that's boring. The quiet character who's nerd. It's like Donatello, but boring. And you don't want to knock off Turtles, and you don't want to do a bad knockoff of the Turtles. So I was trying to think. I said, okay, well, why not the quiet character be muscular? Be really big and muscular. And actually, the reason why they're quiet is so they don't act like the energetic character, because they don't want to be that anymore. They don't like them. And there's still contrast. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn. Maybe it doesn't work at all, and I'm just crazy. But the point I'm trying to get at is that once I started realizing that there is multitudes of material in the contrast, and it's not just I'm night, I'm day, then it felt much more personal, much more realistic, and much more interesting, rather than just, in this case, Clark is not that Smallville does this, but it could have been Clark is the good boy and Lex is a naughty boy. Lex loves money and Clark loves corn. That's not interesting. But not just interesting, it doesn't feel sincere. And if you're not sincere, then your audience starts thinking then you're a jerk, and maybe that'll make you money, but we're all going to die someday. So however you want to be judged, carry on. I'm sorry. I'm in a little bit of a dark mood sometimes today.
I think that you nailed it. I was going to say a very similar thing, but in a different way. I was going to say, I think a mistake that's made is, like you said, Charles, you put them at such extreme opposites, you don't also acknowledge ways that they're similar, because both are human, unless you're writing a fantasy story. But even then, both are full beings. So, for example, Star Wars. We just have to accept that the Sith are evil. We don't want them to win. And the Jedi are good. So we want them to win. But a conflict like that is really boring, and it can be hard to be immersed in it if you have a smart audience, because they're going to start asking questions. Like, why are the Sith bad? Why are the Jedi good? Why should I be rooting for one over the other? But then when you have the story of Anakin, you understand how someone can become a Sith, and you understand more of what they're capable of because of the hate that they carry. And that makes the story way more interesting, because now I have a reason to root for the good guy. I have a reason to be scared of the bad guy. So I think when people are trying to pit a hero against a villain, making the villain evil and then not telling or not showing why they're evil is a pitfall. Also, again, as Charles was saying, those thinking that they have to be opposite as opposed to there's nuances. And it can be a lot more interesting when there are similarities and differences. Because that, again, like that makes your audience think a lot more, and that invests them a lot more in your story.
I agree. I think that lines up with a lot of the things that I was going to say, as far as like making villains one-dimensional. The bad guys are the bad guys, the good guys are the good guys. I think also forgetting to give them something in common makes conflict personal. Because I think if you tie them together in some way, whether it be the way they see the world, whether it be... Here's another example, and I should say this before because I didn't think about it till now, but protagonist antagonist contrasts that are really interesting. The show Justified, which is a great show, and that's Raylan and Boyd. They are a wonderful contrast. Raylan being the U.S. Marshal, Boyd being the criminal. There's this thing that they talk about later on, and I say this when I talk about the common thing, but later on in the series when they ask, why didn't Raylan kill, I think that's what he says, why didn't you kill Boyd? Just kill the guy. And Raylan says, we dug coal together. It's this thing about how, like, in their culture, in the culture of, in Kentucky where they are, it's important, the guy that you go to work with every single day, the guy that you stand shoulder to shoulder with and get your hands dirty with, and you do that kind of stuff, that person, there's a level of common ground and an understanding that you have for each other. Even if you go on to become very different people and do very different things, you always have that. And I think giving your characters that, in essence, Clark and Lex, they'll always have Smallville. Even if they're enemies, they will, in technically if Lex doesn't remember it, but that's besides the point, they will always have Smallville. That's their common thing. Their struggle with identity. They figured out who they were in Smallville. And as the show goes on, that's ultimately what it is. Lex figures out who he's supposed to be in Smallville. Clark figures out who he's supposed to be in Smallville. And it's where the famous quote that comes out, always hold on to Smallville. It's the say that to any Smallville fan and they'll know what you mean. But it's that. And I think that's kind of it's the epitome of Lex and Clark's relationship, is always hold on to Smallville. Because if you did that, if you just hold on to where we got started and where we, that day on the bridge, regardless of if it started with a lie, everything that we've had, everything that we've been to each other started here, and what we could have been. So I think if you failing to give your characters something that ties them to the antagonist in some way. And My Sister's Keeper is another example of that, of, their siblings who love each other, and their love for one another is the thing that ultimately ties them together. So there's that. I think also not tying the rivalry to some form of internal struggle. Lex wanting power because of his father's expectations. I think it's always been interesting, especially when you look at it through the lens of Smallville, of Lex wanting power, needing power. And I think that's kind of why Clark is so afraid to tell him about himself, is because there's that slight understanding of, like, this guy is power hungry. Ironically, the one thing that he can't have is Clark. He can't tell Clark what to do. He can't control Clark. He can't make Clark do anything. So true power, he can't. He has power because he's rich. So there's a level of power within that, but it's not the kind of power that he fully understands. And I think that it's a very interesting internal struggle of Lex's consistent desire for more power and more understanding, eluding Clark's need to sort of remain small and not although he has powers, Clark sort of leans into the whole not relying on them as much. In fact, for a big chunk of Smallville, for a big early part of the series, Clark actually kind of hates his powers and doesn't really want them. So, which is a wonderful contrast between Lex and Clark, who Lex would give anything to have those powers. So, I don't know. Those are some interesting things that I think you tie that ties the rivalry together with an internal beef that's going on within these characters. So, I think that's an interesting thing. So, those are the questions that we have for the show today. But I want to go over our key takeaways. So the pitfall that I think a lot of people make is they make their villains evil for the sake of it instead of showing why they became who they are. Smallville is a great example of showing us that. There are many others, regardless of what people think about the Star Wars prequels. That's another example of showing how a villain becomes a villain and why it works. I think out of all the things that the prequels didn't do great, the arc of Anakin is wonderfully done, in my opinion.
I love
But
Star
so,
Wars.
huh?
I love Star Wars. It's like in a Christmas Story where they're in line to see Santa Claus, and that kid turns around and he goes, "I like the Wizard of Oz." That's why I'm referencing. I've been in a Star Wars mood lately because of leading up to Andor season 2.
Andor, yes. So here are 3 steps to mastering contrast in your storytelling. Number 1, you want to give your protagonist and your antagonist a shared struggle. We just talked about that. Clark and Lex both struggle with identity. Clark with his alien heritage, Lex with his father's expectations. So what you want to do is you want to ask yourself, what fear or struggle does my hero share with their antagonist? The second thing, make them opposites in how they deal with that struggle. Clark chooses humility and restraint, while Lex chooses control and ambition. So ask yourself, how does my antagonist take a different approach to the same core struggle? And then lastly, make their contrast feel inevitable. Clark and Lex start as friends, but every moment in the pilot lays the groundwork for their eventual fallout. And so what you want to do is you want to ask, how does my story plant the seeds for my hero and villain's conflict from the start? We talked about this earlier about planning the destruction right in the introduction. This is a wonderful way to do that. So those are your 3 steps to making sure that you can find contrast and mastering contrast in your storytelling between your protagonist and antagonists. If today's breakdown has helped you imagine what you could do with a personalized feedback on your own story. We work with authors all the time to fix these exact issues. So if you want some expert help, feel free to grab a free consult in the show notes, as well as your contrast cheat sheet, which is also in the show notes. All of that said, we're going to do our final quick fire lightning round 4 questions, first things that come to your head. First thing, what is your favorite friends to enemies arc in fiction?
I'm not sure, but I really love the way they did in Transformers 1. I thought it was so freaking good. I also love Magneto and Xavier, most iterations of that as well. There's probably another one, but those 2 are the ones that immediately come to mind.
Hamilton.
That's a good choice too.
You mentioned that, you referenced it, and now it is in my head as my Roman Empire and the answer to any question.
I was going to say that too. I was going to say Hamilton is probably one of my favorites, but since it's already been taken, I guess I would have to say Smallville, Clark and Lex.
Very good.
Are my favorite. Give me a character who had a great setup but was wasted later.
Where do I begin?
I see this happen all the time in books, and I can't give you a specific example right now, but I see it happen all the time in books, where a character gets a really great description, and there's a really interesting detail about the character that makes you wonder how they're going to become relevant later, and then they just never show up again.
Oh my god, I got one. Sorry.
Okay, I have one. Bear with me here. Pretty much the main characters in the Star Wars sequel trilogy, because Rise of Skywalker, you can see it on the film. If you do minimal research about it, you know that was a corporate product they designed for corporate board of executives. I really don't like that film. It's not as bad as The Cursed Child by any means, but it's not good. It's really bad. And the reason I bring this up is the original script they were going to work with, which was called Star Wars Episode 9, Duel of the Fates. It's not amazing, but it's a hell of a lot better. And it's when you watch Rise of Skywalker, it's like corporate BS. When you read Duel of the Fates, the script, you go, this is better. I can walk away from this fine. So that's my take. I'm specifically talking about Rey in that story. I have a lot of opinions on that sequel trilogy. None of the fan base has ever asked me for my opinion because they are horrible. But now I have the platform, and that's why I finally get to say. I'm going to say Rey specifically, not exclusively, but specifically of the Star Wars sequel trilogy, because what was originally envisioned, not envisioned, they didn't have a plan for the beginning, but what was originally written is fine. It's good. You can walk away fine from it. What they designed in Rise of Skywalker, I bucked the hell out of me. But that's a different conversation.
Okay.
I said,
I didn't need to give a giant explanation. I apologize.
No, it's fine. Mine is okay. So here's the thing: it's not exactly the answer to the question, but it's kind of the answer to the question. But there's so many things wrong with this TV show, so many. But the one that's glaring to me is Cruel Intentions, the TV show. The main character, Caroline, I had to look her name up because I forgot. Caroline Myrtle, or Myrtle, however you pronounce her last name. The thing is, it's kind of reversed. Okay. The question is like characters that were built up in such a way, but then they were ultimately failed. Hers is kind of reversed in the sense of like she's built up, but it's one of those things where like everybody, the way they built her up, they made every other character around her feel like a failure. Like every one of them. They didn't give her a worthy antagonist at all. She's kind of the antagonist of the show in general, but she's also kind of the protagonist depending on how you look at it. But like they make her, you get a very clear picture that this character is one step ahead of everyone the entire time. She's smarter than everyone else in the room. We know that, we hand it down, and there's just literally nobody on the show that seems to be able to stand up to her or at least meet her where she's at. And there's like one character that seems that might have I guess him. That's what I'll say. He's the character that was built up really like, oh, he could be like great. Blaze, that's his name. Blaze. Blaze is a character that they build up from the beginning as like he's might be the only one who can take Caroline and like put her on the spot, and he's smart and he's witty, whatever. But then in the end, they just kind of relegate him to like this desperate dumbass that made like a bunch of dumbass decisions when the entire time you thought that he was more than capable of standing up to and keeping up with the smartest character in the show. And then randomly he's just like he blackmails somebody and makes all these really desperate moves that are just like seem really not great for the character. It just didn't live up to the character at all. So I would say that's who that would be for me. So Blaze, not Caroline. Blaze. One day I will discuss all of the reasons why that show is terrible, but it won't be today. Okay, best villain who wasn't actually a villain.
Killmonger, Black Panther, the movie.
Damn it! He stole it!
Because
And he said it so quickly. He really brought the lightning this week. He was just like,
you win it all.
I was sniped.
We can all go
I
home.
was sniped. What about you?
They really were the villain, but they just had such good backstory. Arthur, the Joker.
Oh, I can see that.
They really were the villain, but they had such...
They were, yeah. That's fair. That's fair. After seeing Mufasa, I will have to say Scar. Yeah. For multiple reasons, partially because of my own personal life, and so I'm a little bit biased, but also because when you really think about it, technically, it's a stupid reason to not be good, but I understand. Okay, so, and then last one protagonist, antagonist dynamic you'd love to rewrite.
Rewrite as in it wasn't good to begin with, or rewrite because it's so fun it needs to live in other places?
Rewrite as either way.
Okay, this was a story I read on Wattpad.
I do know a good one. Okay, sorry. Okay, you first.
This is a story I read on Wattpad a while ago. It was one of the very first stories I ever professionally beta read, but I just loved it so much. It was called Eridanus Flooding, and it was this entire story universe about a former Navy SEAL who now works for the CIA and was on a big mission and is constantly foiled by his arch nemesis, who happens to be a mad scientist, evil doctor, crazy lady. And their dynamic is just hilarious because there's this like will they won't they tension. There's definitely an old flame there. What?
There are fireworks.
It's finally I've been talking about this forever. What? These random things that happen on her background. She finally sees. Everybody sees what I'm talking about now. I thought I was crazy, but this just random stuff just happens.
What was that?
Some kind of wizardry. I don't know.
But no, VC and Jack, my two favorite. VC was really an anti-hero, but for a good part of the story, it was protagonist and antagonist, and I just need their banter and their dynamic to live other places.
So this is weird, and for the record, I've been making a lot of geeky references. I know that's like the most obnoxious thing in the world for like, no, another 30-year-old dude talking about horrible geeky stuff because the corporations told him to. I'm sorry.
For the record, we love you for it.
Facts.
Something that immediately comes to mind. This is not the example, but just kind of popped in my brain. Professor X and Apocalypse from X-Men Apocalypse, the movie. So bear with backstory here. I've seen this movie once. I saw it in a theater, in a small thing. It was 2016. My life was shit. Bad stuff was going down. One of them was my sister was going through a really bad grief. And I said, F it. Let's just go see this movie. It's not going to be good. We're not going to have fun. Just F it. Let's just turn our brains off, right? So we went. It did the job, whatever. I haven't watched it since. I don't really care. I remember it not being all that interesting, whatever. But the thing that is stuck in my brain for years is that movie ends up just being Hollywood CGI schlock, blockbuster, popcorn, blah, blah, blah. Well, it wasn't a blockbuster because I don't think anyone saw it. Anyway, moving on. But it's just stupid, right? But I thought the movie was going to set up this rivalry between Xavier and Apocalypse, because the whole thing is Xavier, you all know Professor X's whole thing about the mutants and humanity, blah, blah, everyone does. Apocalypse, though, he goes, well, I'm practically immortal, practically invincible mutant from ancient Egypt. I'm God, so everything I say goes. And I thought it was going to be interesting that basically it was going to be a rivalry between Xavier being the leader of the mutant community versus Apocalypse, and how one believed in the humanity in people and the other saw humanity as his personal slaves. Not necessarily interesting, but it was an interesting dynamic of like their personal philosophies between these two very powerful mutants. There was just something very different about it, because everyone knows about Magneto and Xavier, blah, 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 blah. But here was like Apocalypse just went, no, you're stupid. Like, I can rule the world and you're stupid. And there was just kind of this push, immovable object, whatever the phrase is, I can't remember, with element of that at first. And then it quickly falls apart into complete garbage and no one cares. Well, not complete garbage, excuse me, that's far too inaccurate and far too mean. But it's popcorn schlock, whatever, move on. But it always stuck in my head that there was something interesting going on between them. That Xavier had to theoretically, he had to put his thoughts into practice. But then the movie kind of quits, a quarter through and move on, whatever. That's something I've always wanted to see redone, because I always thought it was really interesting. Instead of like, Apocalypse is bad because he's going to blow up people, it was a little bit deeper than that and more interesting. There's better examples, but that's what comes to my brain.
The first one that comes to mind would be Hook and Peter Pan in the movie Hook. Everybody who knows anything about me knows that I have a very special relationship with the movie Hook, as it was the thing that introduced me to filmmaking and made me love filmmaking in general. But I've always wanted to see what would have happened if instead of when Peter goes back to Neverland, it's it's still a cool place, whatever, but like what would happen if it was like a 1984 type environment where it was like a dystopian landscape where Hook has taken over everything, and it's kind of a pirate's paradise, and you have the rebellion of the Lost Boys. The Lost Boys are now a rebellion, and Peter comes back and is forced to sort of lead this rebellion against Hook. And I always wanted to see that story because I thought that would be interesting, because I always wondered, especially about that movie specifically, of like, if Peter left Neverland and all of this stuff was going on, who was there to stop Hook from like completely changing Neverland? I mean, to an extent he did. He was kind of running Neverland, but he wasn't running it in the way that I envisioned him doing it. I saw Hook being more of a gray, colorless world that's like muted and all this other stuff. And in that moment where like the Lost Boys convince Peter to imagine again and color comes back to it, that would be such a cool thing to see. But that's been the thing that I've wanted forever. I've even considered rewriting the movie for that reason.
So we have talked about this because it's similar to this Peter Pan pitch I've had. So that's the thing.
Yes, we did talk about that.
You could write the out of that. And by the way, the title, ready for the title? It would be called Peter Pan and the Dusts of Neverland.
I'm with it.
We could write the out of that.
We definitely could. Right here. You heard it here, folks. Give it some time.
What is it from Dio? We'll be on something beach, I can't remember, earning 20% in the next 7 years.
Yeah, give it some time. We got it. Okay, so that's going to wrap up Let's Talk Stories. If you had fun, if you stayed with us to the end, you probably didn't because you have a life. But if you did, if you managed to get to the end of this or you skipped around and you just happened to land on this specific spot, thank you so much for listening. We hope that we were able to help you to identify how to tell better contrast stories. Really, I feel like this was an episode about how to tell better friends to enemy stories, which is just as good. But again, if you are interested in more insights, feel free to join our newsletter, www.obaconnect.com. It's packed with all kinds of storytelling breakdowns and interesting things to help you become a better writer, both on and off the page. Also, you can follow us on TikTok and YouTube. Subscribe to us on YouTube. All of the places. We're there doing things on occasion.
We do things slightly more bite-sized on all the other platforms.
Yes. Extremely bite-sized. This is the longest form of content that we have. So yeah, check those out. Also, don't forget to grab your freebie gift on your contrast cheat sheet, as well as your free consult to where we can break down your story. We want to help you understand it, break it down, and get it to whatever level you were trying to get it to. Other than that, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you next week.